Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to introduce Sylvia Olson to the Peace River area. And you have an illustrious history of writing all these books, plus other books. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, first, thanks for welcoming me here. I had a wonderful trip here. If it wasn't so muddy and snowy, I can tell it's beautiful under the snow. A little bit about myself. I'm from Victoria, born and raised in Victoria, married at 17 and moved to Sartlip First Nation, which is just out of Victoria, close to Butchart Gardens, if you want to, zero in on where it is. And that is what framed up my life, because when you are a little white girl, which I was, and you move from mainstream middle class white Canadian society to an Indian reserve, which is what it was in 1972, you start to see the world differently. So it was that act of moving there and of living there for another 35 years that has been the impetus for me creating the things that I create.
One of the really incredible things and how I heard about you is your interest in wool. And can you tell us a little bit? And we do have your book about working with wool.
Right. Well, I'll hold it.
Yep.
It's a very tactile book. It's got a wonderful cover and it's beautifully done. And that's compliments to Sononis Press that did the book. So this is a really meaningful story for me. For one thing, it's a big book. It was a big job to write it. It comes from my master's thesis, which was helpful because that was all the historical research that was needed for the book. Another sideline to this book is we did at the same time NFB and Prairie Girl Films did a film called The History of Coast Salish Knitters. So a lot came from this story. I think personally, so this is the story of Coast Salish Knitters, which is knitters from Nanaimo south to Victoria that made the famous Cowichan sweater. So just broadly speaking on that note, I believe that that Coast Salish knitting story is one of BC's finest stories. And it's written here. But if you just, it has everything. It has economy, it has love, it has hard work, it has racism, it has all the things that make for a great story and a very Canadian story. So on the bigger note, that's what fascinates me about it. But on a more personal note, I moved to the reserve, as I told you, when I was 17. And in 1972, nobody was happy about a little blonde, blue-eyed girl moving to a reserve. They were no more happy with me moving to the reserve than was mainstream white Canada happy with my First Nations husband living in their communities. That was Victoria in 1972. But as soon as I got there, I was a little handy, artsy 60s girl. And when I got there, there was wool everywhere, in everybody's yards. And I moved just behind my mother-in-law, and there was wool all in front of my house. And I'm sure, I'm making this up, but at least in 20 minutes after moving there, I started making wool with her. That meant washing it, carding it, teasing it, and eventually spinning it and knitting with it. And it was wool and the knitters and my affinity with that made my life in Sartlip First Nation amazing.
And you got along with your mother-in-law, too.
Oh, I am sure that I am her favorite daughter-in-law after that. I think everybody thinks they are, but her and I were very close. And there was an interesting circle that closed when she got older, because when I was this young girl, I made wool with her, and she taught me how to spin, which is a bit of a job, learning how to spin. And by the time she got to be about 87, 88, she was now too old to spin, because spinning is with a treadle, and it's actually quite...
it's a skill.
Yes, and so now she's 87, 88, she can still knit, but I did most of her spinning for her. So full circle at the end of her life. I did a lot of the spinning for her, whereas at the early stages of our relationship, she did the spinning for me.
And you did a lot of talking while you were spinning.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Oh,
Was there a lot of racism in 1972?
Well, we just took it for granted. We took it for granted in our society that white people were superior. We just took that for granted. Now, I didn't. I realized that that's what I mean about an immersion in a First Nation. You go, oh my, whoa, it's shocking. But in mainstream, it was just an assumption that we had. So, yes.
What about Aboriginal people feeling a little bit uncomfortable with you? Did that ever happen?
Oh. Well, they didn't, yeah. They, like, Indian reserves, that's what they were called, were not friendly places to white people coming to live. And with good reason. Outside eyes, the communities were troubled. And they didn't need outside eyes in there. And so, yes, it was uncomfortable, for sure. But I was young, and you only know so much of that when you're young.
Mm-hmm. How many kids did you have?
3. And then we sort of inherited one more Brazilian boy.
Wow.
So I have 4. Mm-hmm.
And before the residential school issue became to the forefront, you wrote a book. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And I'm going to be getting that book into Pine Tree Books so people can order it and look at it. Give us a little take on that.
Well, that book started with my sister-in-law, Diane Harris, who is from, she's from Sartlip, but she lives in Chemainus First Nation. And that book actually started in 1990 when she said to me, Sil, we got to go talk to people from residential school because that's not being talked about. And that's key to a whole lot of things that are going. She was a social worker. Mm-hmm. I said, Diane, come on, whatever. She says, no, if you'll give me a summer, come along with me, I'll set up the interviews. If you'll listen and you'll write it down, you'll know after that summer that this is. So that was in 1990. And at that point, there were no discussions about residential school. In fact, my in-laws, Ernie and Laura Olson, went to a residential school. And you never heard the stories, amongst the family. So I did listen to a whole lot of stories. The people that we talked to, that's a whole interview in itself. But they wanted a conference. They wanted a gathering. A year later, we put on a gathering. It actually still was too difficult at that point. So the gathering was difficult, although 100 people did come in. And a film called Cooper Island Healing Circle came of it. Again? Cooper Island. Return to the Healing Circle. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So Phil Fontaine came. I saw him a couple of months ago, and he said that was the first conference put on like that in the country, and in Sartlip First Nation. And so I had heard so many stories. Then I heard a whole lot more stories from another project that we did in Sartlip. And then we decided, a bunch of us, that needed to be written in fiction for kids so that it was more accessible. Mm-hmm. I didn't know how to write fiction. None of us knew how to write fiction. But no time to say goodbye after a whole lot of learning came of that, yes.
So the book, No Time to Say Goodbye, it's now adopted by the BC curriculum.
It is.
For First Nations? Or
No, for the school system. Has adopted it in grades 4 to 7, I think.
Oh, wow. We'll have to get that book into Pine Tree Books. And the title of the book is No Time to Say Goodbye. And can you just also review, is it an NFB video or film you were talking about? Cooper's?
No. It's not an NFB. It's called Cooper Island.
Island, yeah.
I think it's called A Return to the Healing Circle.
A Return to the Healing Circle. We're going to have to look at that
Yeah.
on Chet TV also.
Yes.
Well, you have a lot of books, and there's one that you talked about a lot with me. It's Yetsa?
Yetz's sweater, and you don't have
You
it.
don't have to. And can you tell a little bit about that? Because that's another book we're going to have to bring in,
Yes.
Yetz's sweater.
It's a beautiful picture book. It's for children, but many adults buy it just because it's beautifully done. It's been illustrated by a woman in pastels beautifully. So Yetz's sweater is the story of a little girl going and visiting her grandmother, and her grandmother is making her a new Cowichan sweater. And what makes that book so special is several things. We actually reenacted the whole thing with our neighbor, who's kind of a surrogate grandmother for all the children, and she actually they took photos of Yetza and my daughter and May, and so the book is actually the action, and it's beautiful. It's beautifully done.
You also talked about your grandchild,
Is right.
and that's Molly.
So when you have a granddaughter who has music in her, from the time she was born, she had music in her, she inspires a story. And this looks quite a bit like her, and put a piano in front of her, put a set of drums, put a tambourine, or just stand her there, she'll sing. This girl makes music, so she inspired me.
They're gonna put me in the movies. They're gonna make me star. But we didn't arrive in Sudbury until 10 after 6, and of course I did not even have time to have a bath last night, so we're known as the Dirty Seven today.
And in fact, most fiddlers I know are a breed unto themselves, sort of stuff. I mean, a fiddler never belch with his fiddle.
Look, I wiped more liquor off my chin than the other fellow drank. Now, you want to believe that?
Cowboys, cowgirls, and cow kids rejoice. After far too long, Caribou Country is coming back to TV screens from sea to shining sea. Monday to Friday at 8 p.m., you can take a step back to a simpler time as the Smith family try to keep their small ranch afloat in fictional Namco, British Columbia. Paul St. Pierre's original, timeless tale of the Smith family ranching in Namco, British Columbia first aired in 1960, and Chet TV is proud to have the exclusive broadcast rights to this piece of Canadian television history. For a full list of programming, shows, and times, check the Chet TV website at www.peacefm.ca/ChetTV and scroll down to the schedule. Don't forget, Chet TV is your station.
You've done 17 books. Let's just go over some of the ones that we have here. This is Catching Spring. And you said that there was a special story about that.
It is a special story. So I'm a storyteller. I tell stories about what I know. On the other hand, once I've told the story, I find out that I didn't know what I thought I knew. So that's the brilliance of telling stories, is that I'm thinking now more that I tell stories to find out things. But they're always about things that are close to my heart. And so if you look at me and say, why are your books all about First Nations? They're not. They're about the place where First Nations and non-First Nations come together. Why? Because that's my life. When I look out my kitchen window, that's what I see. And this book is a story that my children's dad told them since they could hear his stories about a fishing derby that he was in when he was a little boy. And so that's what this book is about. It's about his, and he plays marbles because he played marbles. So I hear stories. When I hear stories, I have to then tell stories. And so that's what this one is. And it's dedicated to all the children in the Olson family. And one of them lives right here. So I'm going to visit her.
And who is it?
Well, to me, it's Angel Adolph. I don't know what her last name is now, but she's my niece, and this book was dedicated to her along with her many, many, many other cousins.
That is really, really good. You also talked about your grandchild.
Is right.
And that's Molly.
So when you have a granddaughter who has music in her, from the time she was born, she had music in her. She inspires a story, and this looks quite a bit like her. And put a piano in front of her, put a set of drums, put a tambourine, or just stand her there, she'll sing. This girl makes music. So she inspired me to write Molly's Promise.
Okay. Middle Row is about?
Well, Middle Row is referring to actually where my stories take place, which is that place between two cultures. And it happens to be the place where my children were born. The Middle Row is about this young fellow on a school bus with all the Native kids at the back and the non-Native kids at the front, which is a story that's familiar to lots of Canadians. And he didn't fit either place, and he sat in the middle row. And my son Adam was very much that way. He was raised on a reserve. He was a little fairer than the other kids. So he always was located
in the
middle row. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And the final book that we have, and we're going to get all of your books within a couple of days.
So why would I not tell a story about cross-cultural love? And that's what Yellow Line is. This is for upper teens. This is one of those lovely Orca easy read books. Teenagers love it because when they have to do a book report, they just pull this right off the shelf because it's nice and easy. But it's about cross-cultural love, and my life was about cross-cultural love. So I knew how to write this book.
Excellent.
It's one of my favorites that I wrote.
So out of all 17
Right.
books, which would be your favorite? Can you say?
No.
You can't say.
No, you actually can't say, because your favorite book, I think, for most authors is always the one they're writing on. They're working on right now.
And what are you working on now? Because it also is the reason why you're here to a large extent, right?
No, I'm here for housing.
I know, but you are writing a housing book, aren't you?
Oh yes, but okay. I've got 2 books that I'm
Okay,
working on
okay.
right now. I'm going to talk first about a travel book.
Okay,
That's
let's
the one
talk
that I'm actually right in the middle of
Okay.
writing that. In 2015, my partner and I got in our red Dodge Caravan, filled it up with wool, knitting kits, books, headed out from Victoria, BC, and ended up in Newfoundland. And it was called My Great Canadian Knitting Tour.
Is it out already?
No, that's the one I'm writing. And my question, what's up, Canada, with knitting? What's up with wool? And what do Canadians have to say about knitting? And what does knitting have to say about Canadians?
Did you have any wool left when you got to
We
Newfoundland?
didn't. We didn't. No, we didn't.
Wow.
We didn't have any kits. I taught a knitting class to more than 800 people across the country.
At the same time?
No.
No.
Yes, right. Yes, we rented a stadium. No, yeah. So it was a great trip, and it's a great lens to look at our country. I mean, there's lots of lenses. You could look at it through bookstores, but I looked at it through yarn shops and knitters, and actually went to tell stories. I told stories about the knitting that I do, but more than that, I went to listen to stories. And so every place that we went, everybody told me their knitting story.
Wow.
Can you imagine?
Is it going to be a big book?
No, it's not. I'm going to have 8 patterns, and then this narrative about knitting and the stories that I was told. Beautiful stories.
Are young people involved in knitting?
They are. They are.
Excellent.
Yeah, they are. Most of our knitting classes, the age was older, but that wasn't to say that there was not a healthy number of young people in them. And, you know, just in terms of workshops, older people are more inclined to go to them.
Now, the second book.
Right.
The book
is why I'm here.
Is why you're here.
Yes.
Tell us your story.
Well, my work, the one that pays me, which is important, is in housing, on reserve housing. I've worked at it for several decades now. I did a PhD. I just graduated in June, and I wrote a dissertation on the history of on-reserve housing programs, government programs. But I work doing workshops. I work as a policy analyst for First Nations, not for the government. And so
Do they call you Dr. Olson?
No, nobody does, but you can.
Okay, Dr. Olson,
Thank you.
tell us your story now about
Now,
housing.
just that's enough of the doctor, but
Okay.
once is good. So I travel all over the country, and I go into First Nations. Like tomorrow, I'll be in Soto, and I will be doing a workshop on housing maintenance, which is a lot of fun. I hope people realize it's going to be fun. But I also will go and I will analyze their policy and help them write policies. I do a lot of education. I actually teach on-reserve housing management at Vancouver Island University. So that's my career. And in terms of the book, yes, my dissertation will morph into a book soon.
And something about what you were telling me is that you've had experiences. Can you tell us a little bit about the fires and housing and that, which is in a way really an emotional side for you when you get into
Yes.
your last book?
It was hopefully not my last book.
No,
But
the most
the next
current.
one, yes, the
most
next
current.
one. Yes, writing a dissertation on reserve housing, having lived on a reserve for 35 years, and it's not a good story, and it's a really hard story to write. As I started talking about it, which you do when you start writing about something, you get asked to talk about it. I was getting ready to give a talk, and I was talking to my sister-in-law, the same one that I mentioned earlier. I was on the phone to her, and I said, "Diane, do you realize that I know 5 families? I can name 5 families that have died in house fires," which is pretty shocking to me. I thought that was pretty shocking. And then, so then she said, yeah. And so we started naming them. And then she named somebody, and I says, "Oh my goodness, that's 6. Then she named somebody else. I says, "That's 7. And the reason I know personally, you know, I'm not a firefighter, I know personally 7 families that have died in house fires is because I've lived my life on a reserve. And Canadians just assume that houses on reserves are substandard, because it would be shocking if the me off reserve could say that, but nobody's really that shocked that I can say that, because the houses that I'm familiar with are on reserves. So that's the sort of thing that motivated me to say, I need to write. I'm not writing the history of traditional houses or even the personal stories of houses. I think there's plenty of First Nations people to write that. I'm writing the history of government programs on reserves, housing programs, and how they have monopolized housing on reserve and how that has affected the people. I believe that houses on reserves are as big of a social problem as residential schools, at least. So that's why it was a difficult
it's
story
a
to
difficult
write.
subject,
Yeah, it's not a good subject.
And I really look forward to all your books being published, and we'll certainly get them onto Pine Tree Books. Just in summary, though, do you enjoy being a writer?
I do. I love being a writer. And I'm really glad I've written many genres: picture books, novels, history, personal essay. There's one genre that I am just delighted I will never have to write again, and that's PhD dissertation. That's a genre that is no fun at all. But now that that's over, I do like writing. I like writing fiction. I like writing nonfiction. It's hard though. There's a lot of creative anxiety that happens with it. So once you get to know how to work that through, it's a pretty special thing to do. Yeah.
If we were going to say in a nutshell, Sylvia Olson, doctor, knitter, storyteller, what else?
Grandmother, grandmother of 8.
Wow.
From 20 to 1.
Wow.
1-year-old to 20. Grandmother, a designer. I design knitwear. Yeah. And
compassionate to the cause.
all causes, lots of causes.
Yeah, all possible
and
causes.
soon to be pianist, because I am, once again, since I was 7, I haven't touched a piano.
Wow.
So now I'm touching them. So we'll see.
Okay.
Maybe a pianist someday.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you.
Cowboys, cowgirls, and cow kids rejoice. After far too long, Caribou Country is coming back to TV screens from sea to shining sea. Monday to Friday at 8 p.m., you can take a step back to a simpler time as the Smith family try to keep their small ranch afloat in fictional Namco, British Columbia. Paul St. Pierre's original, timeless tale of the Smith family ranching in Namco, British Columbia first aired in 1960, and Chet TV is proud to have the exclusive broadcast rights to this piece of Canadian television history. For a full list of programming, shows, and times, check the Chet TV website at www.peacefm.ca/ChetTV and scroll down to the schedule. Don't forget, Chet TV is your station.
They're gonna put me in the movies. They're gonna make me star.
But we didn't arrive in Sudbury until 10 after 6, and of course I did not even have time to have a bath last night, so we're known as the Dirty 7 today.
And in fact, most fiddlers I know are a breed unto themselves, sort of stuff. I mean, a fiddler never belch with his fiddle.
Look, I wiped more liquor off my chin than the other fellow drank. Well, you want to believe that.